let's take a deep dive into Apple. This is educational and entertainment purposes only, and we're going to look at the story of Apple, because even if you know a lot about Apple, investing in the company itself, there is so many more layers. And if only Apple's had layers, that would be a great metaphor, but it doesn't. So we'll just keep going. Anyway, let's first talk about China. Now, they mention in their 10K here that imagine tariffs, right? If they go up or down, that's going to have a major impact on Apple because they do so much manufacturing, so much in China. And so that's going to affect their gross margin. How much profit can they make on their products? Or they're going to have to make their products more expensive to compensate, which obviously could alienate some purchasers. Although, to be honest, Apple does charge quite a bit more for their products. And so maybe that's the route they'll go. I have no idea. But a much scarier concept will be controls. So imagine if America will control how many things can be imported, or by the same idea, China controls how many things can be exported, right? They need more silicon chips. They don't want to export them, whatever that might be. Also, if they want to change their suppliers, restructure, right? There's all of these things that go into a major headache for Apple if there's an issue with China. And you can just imagine all the tensions growing with China right now. It's not hard to see, whether it's from everything that's happening right now or the human rights issues. And there might be no advance notice. Now, presumably Apple's planning something, if not just politically, hopefully something more strategic, so that they're not just praying that everything goes well. Nevertheless, they do mention that a lot of their manufacturing is in whole or in part by outsourcing partners, and it's single locations, and of course it's primarily in Asia. So the real problem I have, at least in this part of the story, in terms of their manufacturing, is that Apple has, we're seeing a lot of supply chain issues, and they are really dependent in one area that has very high tensions right now. So that is quite a bit of a risk for Apple. And the other side of that risk, of course, is, well, what happens if China, just like they've done with Coke and other companies, asks, Apple to come to their defense to allow them to keep selling in China or manufacturing in China? Well, China's the second largest country in terms of sales, if you consider country and not like the EU. We'll have to get into that later. Well, they have a little bit of leverage on Apple, and that could annoy a lot of American consumers. So, it's a very difficult and tough balancing act for Apple to really manage. So something to really consider in terms of this story is just the geographical issue will play quite a bit of a role. Now, they did mention a whole slew of risks in their 10K. I just want to bring up a few that I thought were interesting. They mentioned components from single or limited sources, right? We're seeing supply chain issues. What happens if certain companies have issues, whether it's supplying or down the, further up their chain? That could be a big hindrance for Apple, whereas other companies like Google, they can just take that exact same chip from someone else. Well, presumably, not all chips are created equal, of course. Now, in terms of the retail stores, right, they require substantial investment, and Apple's behind that. And so I don't know. You'd have to look up, have they closed stores or not? But I think they see this as part of their sales channel. So it's very important for them. And of course, the repair system, right? Apple, I believe they call them geniuses. So this is very important for Apple. And so they're going to lose money on this. I don't think it's a big deal, but just something to consider. Now, interest rate risks. I thought this was fascinating because they mentioned that in terms of interest rate risk, they are very sensitive to the fluctuations in the US interest rates. And you can read through this paragraph at your leisure if you'd like. But we're going to see interest rates going up, presumably. It hasn't happened yet, but especially with inflation fears and especially with this idea that it's less transient. We'll see if that's really true, but that seems to be what the Fed is saying now. And a number of board members have been saying it for a bit. So something to seriously consider, that interest rates will affect a tech company, and Apple themselves feel that they will have issues with interest rates and keeping their cash and fighting inflation, all these different issues. Okay, now let's talk about stock buybacks. Now this is, I suppose, a good part of this story, if you own stock, of course. They were authorized to repurchase $315 billion of the company's stock. They've already done 254. They have left over $60.9 billion that they can still buy back. They're authorized to buy back. They don't have to buy back, but if you've bought 250, you almost think, why not throw in the last 60 billion? Obviously, we're going to see what happens, and as they make more money, well, they'll be able to either return it to the investors through dividends, stock buybacks, or investing. So they're going to have to make almost one of those decisions, and presumably they're going to buy back stock. They have an enormous amount of money. Okay, so when it comes to products, this I thought was fascinating, and so you can know an enormous amount about Apple, But first of all, their iPhone is the largest sales source for Apple, right? You're looking at $191 billion in 2021. That is huge. Next after that is services. Now, what does services include? Well, that includes them selling advertising, Apple Care, cloud, digital content, payments. I don't know if this is in order of what gives them their money and their source of revenue. Let's just assume it is. That's fascinating. And you'd think that services, if that's really true, if that's their order of operations in terms of what's giving them the revenue, they'd have a very high margin. But nevertheless, we'll talk about that in a bit. Wearables, home, and accessories. Now, this I thought was fascinating. We're going to have to talk a lot more about this. And once again, if this is in order, so you're looking at AirPods, right? They keep increasing those price, increasing what they're relaying to the consumer. And, my perspective is almost that even if you don't really improve the AirPods at this point, they are something that people will want to buy as they kind of grow into this platform. And, people lose their AirPods, so it's sadly enough, but nevertheless, it's something that can be purchased. And then you have the Apple Watch, right? Everyone knows about the Apple Watch. I think that they're growing that in terms of the health side of things. I think that's very smart. Apple TV, you'd almost think that that is kind of the history. It's done. They haven't done much with it. I haven't heard a lot of buzz about it, but we are going to talk about that shortly because they're going, it looks like reviving that area. And of course, we're going to talk about HomePod as well. Now, Macintosh, or Mac as they label it here, I assume this is their laptops, their desktops, everything. Now, this is not a small number, 35 billion. But when you look at everything up until now, it's kind of funny when you think of Apple, you're thinking about the computer. And yet in terms of sales, right, not only is their iPhone, 5-6 times more than their laptop and their desktop sales, but even the wearables and home accessories do more. Now, services, maybe you'd think ad revenue, who knows how much you could make from that, so fair enough. But even the wearables, home, and accessories make more than the sale of, the laptops and the desktops. Now, last year that was also true. The previous year that was not true. They were pretty hand in hand. But that is, to me, fascinating. And so wearables, home, and accessories seems to be growing quite steadily, right? Even a little bit more, I would say, or maybe substantially more than their Mac sales, right? Because before they were neck and neck. And now, wearables, home, and accessories has surpassed by 3 billion. So that's pretty impressive. That's a 10% boost. And now iPad is next. And if you look at iPad, from 2019 to 2020 is a 10% moderate gain. But now 2020 to 2021, huge, 34% gain, one of the biggest after the iPhone gains. And just the iPad arena alone is almost reaching their sale of, once again, Mac is just... It's just mind-boggling that that's including, right? That's beating not just the laptops, but the desktops, everything. And maybe that's because Apple hasn't been pushing their desktop as much. I'm not entirely certain. But nevertheless, it's fascinating to me that the iPad is becoming that big of a niche for Apple, okay? The iPad alone. So this is an important part of the story to me that you can't really ignore in terms of the fact that Apple is diversifying. Now, the other thing that you might be willing to say is that their laptops, their desktops, right, are those falling off? Meaning, are those doing worse? Or are these other things doing better? Well, at the end of the day, Mac is growing, so it's hard to make that argument. Maybe if Mac was doing even better, they'd be growing even more. You could, in theory, make that argument. But it's hard for me to hear that. It's what I believe is going on here is that people want these wearables. They want the iPads. They want the other things. And they're more affordable than the Macs, right? So the Mac has maybe more of a niche market, I suppose. That's kind of the way I look at this right now. And of course, we're going to come back to this HomePod issue because I think that is probably the most fascinating part of the story, at least for 2021, or rather, I should say 2022, right? We're done with 2021 at this point. Now, I do want to bring up here when they put in these ones in their footnotes here, that this is deferred value. And that includes unspecified software upgrade rights. And you can read the top paragraph here, how they factor that in. I don't think it's a big deal personally. Why? Because at the end of the day, it's only $11 billion. I know that's an enormous amount, right? But when you're looking at Mac being 30 billion, right, and all the other ones each being 30 billion, so they have deferred revenue of 11 billion. I suppose it's a big deal if they don't get that. And if it's concentrated more in the iPhone, that's kind of what I'm guessing. But maybe there's also concentration in the iPad. Do the Macs, do those areas have deferred revenue? Is that why Mac, because they don't have deferred revenue as much, is that why they're looking to be like a smaller sale and revenue than compared to other areas. It's always a little hard to tell. That's why I always like more information. But nevertheless, this is what's going on. So, I guess they have to recognize the revenue or consider the idea of the revenue, and they're recognizing it now. I suppose that I've seen lots of companies do it different ways. That's the way Apple decides to do it. I kind of prefer not that way personally, because what I'd really like to see is when you actually get the money, when someone actually signs up, okay, tell me that they've got it. I don't want to just know that you have the potential. And if you want to tell me that as something separate, that's great. Give me a separate line item, fine. But nevertheless, this is how Apple does it. Lots of people do it this way, so I'm not going to really fault them on that. It's just one of those things that gets annoying when you really want to understand the company. Okay, now in terms of gross margin by products, so you can see that in terms of products, you're making $105 billion, and in terms of services, $47 billion. So when it comes to the products, the percentage is only 35%. Services, it's 69.7%. Now, once again, that makes a lot of sense. If a lot of that is from, let's say, ad revenue, you don't have to spend a lot of money to make money from ad revenue, right? It doesn't cost you a lot. Same thing with Apple Care. People might buy a lot of Apple Care and never ever use it. So that makes sense that services are that profitable, but it's also important to know if Apple's able to grow their services, let's say using their cloud software or whatever it might be, it's good to know that they have a really high profit margin there, and you're going to obviously appreciate that as an investor. Now, I want to talk about some really interesting things, and that is, first of all, the Apple Watch. You can see in terms of people purchasing the Apple Watch, it's going up and up and up and up in 2020. And, this is 10% of iPhone users have the Apple Watch. And I suppose the idea is most people who are going to buy the Apple Watch are going to be specifically iPhone users because of that technology that works well. I suppose I don't like the word, but synergy. Hate when people use that word. But nevertheless, it might actually be applicable. I tend to hate it because it's meaningless jargon. But here, I think, maybe I'm wrong. You correct me if I'm wrong. By the way, if you like these videos, please let me know in the comments. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to hear the deeper financial dive that we'll also do coming up. But nevertheless, they're considering that that 10% of iPhone users by the end of 2020. So, this is a little bit old data. But the idea is that they're going to grow as you get an Apple Watch. You're more entrenched in the community, the Apple community, let's say. And as you own the iPhone, it makes it more likely for you to get the Apple Watch. And of course, this wearable side of things is really growing. And I think Apple's focusing on the health side of the Apple Watch, which is quite fascinating. And we'll see how they do. That's just the end of the day. They have to really make it useful, right? Someone has to see the functionality, not just the design. And that was a big problem they had with the HomePods, right? HomePods, just imagine Google, or I don't know, not Google, but Echo Dot or whatever they call Google Nest. I forget what they call all these things, these assistants. And originally HomePod was a horrible failure, really. It was $350. It was really good speaker, but not good enough for those people who love their speakers and they love the music, because it just wasn't at that grade for the $350. And yet, if you don't really care that much, but you want a good speaker, you're not really going to spend $350. And the Echo Dot being, $50 or $25 or whatever it might be, depending on the sales and who knows, your currency. Obviously, it was difficult to compete. Now they have the mini pod, I suppose a much worse speaker is my guess. And nevertheless, it is $99, and I think it was on sale maybe $79, Boxing Day, whatever, or Cyber Monday, whatever, whatever country you're in, whatever sale they have. So obviously trying to compete, yes, still more expensive, and possibly not as good with Siri compared to, Alexa or some of the other speech recognition platforms. But nevertheless, there is something very special about Apple. First of all, you're joining the ecosystem, right? People like to have things in the ecosystem, not just as they match visually, but because they work really well together. And so, for example, Siri can recognize up to 6 different family members, and so it will, tailor what's going on with the mini pod, let's say music or whatever it might be, when you ask to play something for each person. So that's pretty neat. That's something that Apple can do, because they have, if you're in the family, especially with your different devices, so they also can get, in theory, more data about you and just how you use it. Also, they're focusing on only using Hey Siri, so you can see that, and we'll talk about this in a second, but you're going to see that privacy is a big idea here. Nevertheless, they're going to allow intercom, so all your Apple devices, And that's an amazing thing, right? Because like I said, you're part of this community. It's going to connect to all of your Apple devices and allow you to talk to anyone, anywhere. Instead of like a phone call, it's almost like a paging kind of thing. And I'm sure all the other devices have this. Well, I've heard of quite a few of them. Nevertheless, the advantage with Apple is you already have people in your family with iPhones or with whatever those devices might be. And so now you can connect to all these things. And just imagine, you're watching something on your Apple TV in one room, you go to another room, it transfers to the mini pod or it transfers to your AirPods, all these different things, interactions that can really happen. I think it's kind of neat, and they definitely have a little bit of an edge there in terms of creating all of these device interactions. Nevertheless, they're behind, and so that could be a serious issue for them. Now, here I think is where they're really trying to hit their sales point. And they are focusing, Apple has turned their attention towards privacy and letting people know they protect their privacy, right? You see these Facebook lawsuits with Apple and Facebook, and Apple kind of cutting Facebook off from some of your data. And so you're seeing that Apple really is trying to pretend, or maybe legitimately going to protect your rights. So how do they do that? First of all, they're only going to listen when you say, "Hey Siri," nothing else. They're not going to record anything else, which maybe some other platforms have been caught recording people. And also what I think is really neat is this note on the right, which is when you ask Siri something, your request is associated with a random identifier, not your Apple ID. Now, I think other services also might do something similar, maybe not exactly the same. Now, the issue with some of these things is that they can still identify you with whether it's your IP address or whether it's with something that you searched, and so that's related to you personally. But I think the random identifier, hopefully, once again, if they're not using your IP address at all, as well with the random identifier, that could be quite useful. Now, like I said, there's going to be deals, at Best Buy, whatever it is, $20 discount. So people are, I think Apple's really pushing this new accessory. And you can see how much the accessories are growing. Now, let's talk quickly about Apple TV. Where's this going? So first of all, you can have they have a new upgrade to the whole Apple TV kind of system, and it's part of HomeKit, part of all these different things. They have a new remote control where it has that kind of, if you remember that iPod, circle, you can run your finger around, and so rewind, fast forward. So that's an interesting technology, a much better remote control. What I thought was neat was, and this does not strike me as typical Apple. You can see at the bottom here, I got it from somewhere else in the 10K or somewhere else, maybe on some branding, I don't know, sales pitch somewhere. But you can actually just buy the remote alone without upgrading your Apple TV. So Apple TV is not as big of a deal as I think it should be. They didn't do as far as I consider, enough, but I don't know exactly who their audience is. Nevertheless, one of these things about being in the ecosystem that I thought was interesting is, this audio sharing, for example. Let's say if you have AirPods, two of you want to listen to the TV at the same time. And so you can both put in AirPods. You can share the audio between two people with their AirPods, and let's say quiet to everyone else in the room. Also, same thing with HomePod Mini, right? You can have left and right speakers. You can use your iPhone to control the TV. So you're kind of seeing this, like I said, I don't like synergy, but this idea of connecting all these devices. And the more you can connect, the better it is for Apple, I suppose, and the better and more flawless of an experience someone can have and enjoy. So, in terms of the story for Apple, I think they have a lot of growth potential, obviously. They are a massive company with a massive amount of money, and we'll deal with the financials next time. So please subscribe if you want to hear about that, or just check back, whatever suits you. But you tell me where you think their technology is going. I see them pushing a lot more devices, right? Their wearables are growing substantially, and so that could even overtake their desktop, their laptops, which to me is fascinating, and their iPads, right? All these things as they grow and grow and grow. And what I think the key here is that these are low cost introductions to the ecosystem. And so it's like a little bit amazing to me that they're not making more money from their Mac side of things, maybe because their laptops last long enough. I don't know. I haven't really wrapped my head around how all of these other sectors are doing so much more. I get how the iPhone can do more because it's really its own contained thing. And maybe that brings the watch, and then once you have the watch, you get all these other things, and you maybe the Mac side of things, the actual computer side of things, that sector will grow because of all of these wearables. I have no idea. It's very confusing to me. And I guess on the other hand, maybe some people are buying multiple wearables. I really don't know. You tell me what you think is going on. It's just very odd to me. I have not wrapped my head around this story exactly, how to make sense of it, why these other sectors are growing so much. So please let me know what you think is going on, because I would find it actually fascinating. But like I said, I think there's a lot of growth for Apple, even if they can't grow their Mac side of things. They have a lot of wearables, they have a lot of different devices that are really growing, whether it's just the AirPods, which, it's amazing how much of a source of revenue that is for them, and how much they can charge and get away with it is, to me, fascinating. And maybe they deliver that value, right? Like, I have no idea. I guess they must, because people are buying them. Okay, so anyways, like, comment, subscribe. Please let me know what companies you'd like me to analyze. It's always helpful to get other suggestions of what people are interested in knowing about. But I was kind of curious to see what's happening with Apple. And like I said, we're going to go deep dive really into the financials specifically, and not just the story, because I thought there was a lot of the story I was learning from the 10K that maybe I would have missed otherwise. And I would have focused more on their chips and where they're going with their laptops and all those types of things, when I think that might be actually missing the picture a little bit in terms of where they're making the money now. Maybe that will grow, but I'm not so convinced, especially with everything else growing so fast. So please, like I said, let me know what you think.